Hi, Debbie here, and today I have an easy watercolour card for you using heat embossing. The raised lines of the heat emboss design creates little wells in which to drop colour. The white outline gives a light and airy feel and negates the need for no-line watercolouring. I added lots of dimension by die cutting the banner and also a few individual elements too, and then added white heat embossing through a stencil for a subtle textural background. I used the Wonderful Banner set from SSS Stamp for this card, which comes with matching dies. I'm going to be heat embossing the images, and so I chose hot press watercolour card, as the smooth surface is easier to get a good stamped impression than on textured cold press watercolour card. I treated the card with anti-static powder and then stamped the images in clear embossing ink before sprinkling with white embossing powder and heat setting. I like to do all the tricky elements before watercolouring, as I don't want to spend the time colouring a piece only to mess up on the heat embossing or die cutting. And so I lined up a greeting from the Wonderful Banner set and stamped it in clear embossing ink before sprinkling with antique gold embossing powder and heat setting. After which I took the matching dies for the Wonderful Banner set and lined them up over the stamped images, keeping them in place with washi tape before running them through my die cutting machine. I use the Gemini Junior die cutting machine, and because I have pain issues with my hands and arms, I find the Gemini much better for me than the crank it yourself types of die cutters. I have no issue with the older versions of die cutting machines. It just means that my personal circumstances mean that an electric version is preferable. I would usually tape a watercolour piece to a board to stop the card from warping. However, I didn't want to use lots of water on this piece, and so jumped straight in with the colouring. I know a few of you like to know the specific colours I use, and so here goes. All the paints are Daniel Smith watercolours. The leaves were based on Cascade Green with a mix of whatever was on my palette and a touch of cerulean blue chromium. The banner was based on Mayan Blue with a little transparent red oxide to mute the hue. The flowers were a light wash of Aussie Red Gold, and then for the centre of the flower, a mix of Pyrrole Scarlet and Pyrrole Crimson. I kept the strongest concentration of colour, and as such the shadows, to the edges of the banner and the loops of the banner which go behind, and the leaves where they tucked into the arrangement. I then drew the colour out with a damp brush. I repeated the painting for the individual flowers too. My favourite bit is where the colour explodes from the centre of the flower, the new paint moving through the wet surface. Oh, and I also like some of the leaves where you can see how the Cascade Green separates as it dries. I went back in and added a few darker areas here and there to add contrast. I then set the watercolour piece aside while I worked on the background. I took a piece of fog card, cut to the same size as the card front, and used the simple duo stencils from CZ Design. The great thing about these stencils is that they are the size of an A2 card too, and so I lined up the heart stencil of the duo on the fog panel, knowing that the stencil design would be perfectly centred. With a spatula I spread white embossing paste through the stencil, and then the best part is lifting the stencil to reveal the design. When the embossing paste was dry, I trimmed the panel to be just a tad smaller on all sides, and then added foam tape to the back before adding the panel to a card base cut and scored from Ivory Card. I added foam squares over the back of the watercolour die cut banner piece and also on the back of the individual flowers, and then added those to the card too. To finish off, I rummaged through my collection of embellishments and picked out pink enamel dots from Hero Arts, sequins from SSS Stamp, and pearls from Little Things by Lucy's Cards. And that completes this card, where the white heat embossed lines create wells, making it very easy to watercolour, not forgetting the dimension and texture from the embossing, as well as die cutting the banner and the individual flowers, and the texture embossing paste details on the background. There are links in the YouTube description to the products that I've used today, as well as a coordinating link to the blog post over at limedigidesign.com, where you'll find more details of this card. I want to thank you for joining me, and if you've enjoyed this tutorial, I'd be delighted if you give it a thumbs up and to subscribe to this channel. Also, if you'd like to get notified when a new video is out, don't forget to hit the bell button next to the subscribe button too. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.